seconds left. So it's coming. So let's continue with our study on productivity in Canada.
Scheduled on productivity. We've had a really good set of discussions over the course of the past couple of months on this, and we've got two final witnesses that are appearing here today virtually. Juste un petit rappel que tous les témoins ont effectué.
Just to remind you that everyone has done the connection tests required before the meeting with the witnesses.
You can give me a thumbs up. Your translation is working in both languages. Excellent. Okay. So, you will each have upwards of 5 minutes to provide introductory remarks. And we will start. I just got to get my notes in order here. We're going to start with Protect Our Winters Canada, Natalie Knowles, who is a researcher with the organization. And Ms. Knowles, we'll turn the floor over to you for upwards of 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you so much for having me here today to speak on behalf of Protect Our Winters Canada. This is a nonprofit representing Canada's outdoor recreation industry. My name is Dr. Natalie Knowles. I'm POW's Research and Policy Director, and I specialize in research related to outdoor recreation economies. I'm the co-author of a report released in 2024 that for the first time analyzed Canada's outdoor recreation economy. Canada's outdoor recreation sector is an underappreciated economic powerhouse, representing $101.6 billion in annual economic activity and over 1 million full-time jobs. This sector, the outdoor recreation sector, not only stands above or at par with other major industries, including forestry, agriculture, pharmaceuticals, and oil and gas, but this report underestimates the size of outdoor recreation to Canadians, because this report was based off of existing outdoor recreation sector reporting and doesn't include many key subsectors that millions of Canadians participate in due to the diversity of the outdoor recreation industry and a lack of coordinated economic impact assessments at the regional, provincial, and national level. Our outdoor recreation economy report for Canada shows that outdoor recreation is a major industry across our country. It's the lifeblood of countless rural communities across Canada, especially some communities whose economies are naturally transitioning from traditional resource economies. And outdoor recreation is growing rapidly, but these contributions to our national economy are not being reported. For comparison, a similar situation was in the U.S., but a few years ago, the U.S.'s Bureau of Economic Analysis added an outdoor recreation satellite account, finding that outdoor recreation creates $1.2 trillion in economic output and represents 2.3% of their overall GDP. This economic reporting has not only helped better understand the economic impact, but has led to direct policy and investment by both public and private sectors. In addition to our estimates on the economic impact, outdoor recreation is a labor and workplace productivity booster. Participation in outdoor recreation activities by Canadians, particularly participating in natural settings, has been proven to reduce stress, anxiety, depression, improve mental health, enhance cognitive function like creativity, problem solving, innovative thinking, focus and mental clarity, increase physical health, well-being, cardiovascular health, immune function, enhance stronger social well-being, including team building, interpersonal relationships, and supportive workplace, assist in youth development and healthy aging, and contributes to higher job satisfaction, sense of purpose and fulfillment, and less burnout in the workplace. So these benefits of outdoor recreation transcend beyond the sector and can contribute to stronger workforces, more resilient businesses, and greater productivity across all industries and regions across Canada. Investment in outdoor recreation assets like trail networks, green spaces, bike shares by the government and private sectors alike can help attract and retain workforce talent. We're finding that millennials, high-income individuals, and households with children are more likely to consider outdoor recreation and access to nature into their residential and employment decisions. So beyond the direct workforce, outdoor recreation provides a broad range of social benefits that strengthen our economy, as well as the individual and community health for Canadians. Healthy lifestyles associated with outdoor recreation are also estimated to reduce public health care costs in Canada by between $3.9 billion to $23 billion annually, attracting new residents and faster growing economies to rural communities, and enhancing active citizenship and improved sense of belonging among new immigrants to Canada. And there's been evidence that this can support our truth and reconciliation, particularly call to action number 92, building respectful relationships and ensuring that Indigenous communities gain long-term economic benefits from activities taking place on their lands or using their resources. From skiing to mountain biking, canoeing rivers to hiking through the forests, our diverse outdoor recreation options and vast natural playgrounds are a key piece of Canadian culture, well-being, and livelihoods that transcend political differences. As such, we believe that to boost Canadian productivity and competitiveness, we call upon the government and this committee to support the sustainable growth of the outdoor recreation sector by starting to collect and report on Canada's outdoor recreation participation and economic impact, as has been done in the United States to much success, and to invest in and protect natural outdoor recreation assets and infrastructure so that we can continue providing the productivity within the sector of outdoor recreation as well as to other sectors across Canada.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ms. Knowles. Well, Mr. Meyer, I have been accused of being partial to Manitobans in the past. I'll do my best to be as impartial as possible here, but it's very nice to see you, sir. Colleagues that don't know, Mr. Meyer is the president and CEO of Red River College Polytechnic, located in my hometown of Winnipeg. So, Mr. Meyer, always a pleasure to see you. Turn the floor to you for upwards of 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for the invitation to appear today. As the chair mentioned, my name is Fred Meyer. I'm the president and CEO of RRC Polytech, Manitoba's only polytechnic institution. And I'm joining you today from our Notre Dame campus in Winnipeg, which is located on Treaty 1 territory and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. In March of 2024, Carolyn Rogers, Senior Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, focused a spotlight on productivity crisis in Canada. It's now widely recognized that our country is in trouble. As president of a polytechnic institution, I want to share a perspective that doesn't get the attention it should. Colleges and polytechnics provide the skills and credentials that drive productivity in virtually every economic sector and in every region of our nation. And institutions similar to ours play a more significant role in countries around the world that are leading in productivity. Our collaborative applied research activities with industry partners advance innovation through adoption and the dispersion of technology. We've built incredible trust with business partners and proven that we can deliver what they need. Our partnerships are deep and our outputs help elevate Canada. Polytechnics Canada, 13 member institutions alone, account for about 138,000 job-ready graduates in 24-25. And more than 18,000 of them worked on applied research projects while they studied. Colleges and polytechnics have the ingredients to help grow productivity in Canada. Yet funding, policy decisions, and general optics of college and polytechnics compared to universities continue to support a hierarchy and advance a systemic disadvantage. Colleges conduct the majority of Canada's SME-focused, industry-driven applied research. Yet we receive less than 3% of the Tri-Council's total budget for research funding. This imbalance makes it difficult to scale the kind of productivity-enhancing innovation and technology adoption that keeps investment in Canada, and it limits growth of benefits we can provide to Canadian businesses. More and more, within post-secondary, we're seeing signs that our peers recognize how important colleges and polytechnics are in helping businesses turn innovation into productivity and profit. Last year, RRC Polytech became a partner and lead of Labs 4, a national network of 38 colleges and universities, helping researcher entrepreneurs turn academic breakthroughs into real-world ventures, products, and solutions. We received the largest ever Tri-Council's grant of more than $24 million to be awarded to a college, and recognition from Ottawa that applied research by polytechnics and colleges is a catalyst of productivity in Canada. It was a big win and a step in the right direction for research funding in post-secondary education. Equally important, something I call parity of esteem. Colleges and polytechnics need to be seen as different but equal contributors to Canada's success as universities. The current hierarchy in post-secondary education is counterproductive to what the sector can generate when we work together and when our unique strengths are advanced and equitably funded. Canada's SMEs employ more than 16 million people and comprise 98% of all businesses in our country. They don't have massive R&D budgets, They need rapid access to graduates who have applied knowledge, work experience, and the technical skills to implement and optimize technology quickly. We fill that gap. We help them work with existing technologies so they can become digitally literate and competent now. And we do it all in partnership with industry and through foundational industry support. RRC Polytech's ability to support Manitoba SMEs and manufacturing transformed in 2023 with the launch of the Price Institute of Advanced Manufacturing and Mechatronics, which was possible in large part by the vision and generosity of Dr. Jerry Price. The Institute's Center for Automation and Manufacturing Technology Transfer now connects SMEs with our research experts and our students to rapidly explore, then adopt new technologies into their operations. It's just one example of mutually beneficial outcomes we provide for students, industry, and community partners, and for Manitoba and for Canada. We drive productivity. We want what you want for Canada. We can do more, but that requires more. More funding for applied research, greater recognition as a viable post-secondary option for more Canadians, and parity of esteem. Thank you for your time this morning. I encourage you all to visit colleges and polytechnics and learn more about the impact that we have on productivity across the country. And I look forward to hosting you at RRC Polytech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meyer. Okay, colleagues, we will enter into our line of questioning. So witnesses, just so you're aware of the order of things, there's a pre-allotted amount of time per recognized political party around the table, and we follow that pattern. Madame Dancho, the floor is yours. 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your opening statements. And certainly, Mr. Meyer, I have questions for you. It's great to see you again, and I appreciated the number of tours that you've provided to me to get a better sense of really what we're doing in Winnipeg. But overall, I took away from those tours that polytechnics are really leading the way in bridging the gaps of advanced manufacturing in Canada by working with private sector to commercialize a lot of these incredible Canadian ideas. And so I did want to ask you a bit about that, because of course, you know, we're studying productivity, and our biggest competitor and our biggest trading partner, of course, is the United States. And as you know, their productivity has really become leaps and bounds ahead of us over the last decade. And in fact, as you may know, their real U.S. manufacturing and construction is up over 300% since 2008, and ours has been really flat during that time. U.S. firms invest triple what Canadian firms do in productivity-related technologies, about $12,800 annually per worker. We're $4,100 annually per worker. So they really have advantages over our Canadian workforce. And I'm just wondering what role polytechnics play in that innovation and advanced manufacturing, how critical that is that we support that as taxpayers, as government, to ensure we can close that productivity gap with the United States.
Thank you very much for your question, and a good one. I touched on it briefly in my comments, and that was around applied research. And just for those that haven't spent a lot of time in sort of the applied research area, applied research is really done in partnership with industry. It's not related to discovery research. It's very much focused on a problem or an innovation that a business owner and industry is looking for. So polytechnics, colleges across Canada are really one of the only areas that applied research can be delivered in Canada. It's done also in partnership or in conjunction with students who work very closely on those projects as well. So what's happening in that environment is that a company will come into a polytechnic or a college that has applied research capabilities. They'll work with researchers, which are our staff members who have industry-level experience. They'll work on prototyping or developing a product that a company has, either an existing product that needs to be changed or modified using new technology. And then at the same time, we have students involved in that process. So what you're getting there is you're getting a company that's working in a public institution with public funding that's available, in conjunction with students and researchers. The other thing that's quite unique about applied research in our institutions is that intellectual property that is brought into that environment is retained by the company or the partner that we're working with in that environment. That reduces the barriers to entry, that allows companies to enter without risk into that environment. The other thing that we've seen quite often is that the students who are involved in those projects then end up having the skills and the talent required for that company to move on and implement the technology that they've just developed in our research facilities. So it's an ability for them to access talent. It's an ability for us to develop talent. It's an ability for us to help, especially companies that don't have the size for their own in-house expertise for research to really access facilities and equipment and researchers to do that.
Thank you very much. And I believe it's the case that for every dollar invested in applied research carried out by polytechnics, it generates a combined private and social return ranging from a low estimate of $8.09 to a high estimate of $18.49. So again, $1 in, almost $19 out in economic activity. And you were also mentioning in your opening remarks that from the Tri-Council, sort of those government council, research councils, that distribute the taxpayer funding for research and development, 97% goes to universities and only 3% goes to polytechnics. Is that correct? And was there any movement on that in the recent budget that was put forward by the federal government?
Yeah, that is. It's a historical trend. I don't think we've ever seen colleges or polytechnics stream for polytechnics and for colleges to access. The one thing that we were looking in the budget was an extension of a top-up that was received in 2023 to that program. And that was an additional $36 to $40 million in that program. We didn't see that in this budget. We're seeking clarity for that right now. It expires in April of 2026, which will reduce the capacity of the work that we can do in polytechnics and colleges.
Thank you very much. And just more on the sort of the value for money, I think that's going in from taxpayers, and to sort of help make the argument that I would agree. Certainly, polytechnics deserve a larger portion of funding, whether the overall funding envelope goes up and as does yours or whatever it needs to be. But I do think that it is it's quite disproportionate, 97 to 3%. But even more to that, I believe polytechnics leverage $2.24 from other sources for every dollar invested. So it's not just taxpayers burdening the publicly funded research, it's also the private sector that's supporting that. I think that's so important, and I think that is higher for polytechnics than it is for universities. Again, the economic output, as I mentioned, is quite high. So certainly just in our last minute, I would just say, in essence, one recommendation or two quickly to government to ensure we can maximize polytechnics and advanced manufacturing. I'm almost out of time, so in brief.
Yeah, I would say that if you look at countries that lead in productivity, I would say the investment in applied research is higher as well. And then the other thing is that the skills and talent that are coming out of these institutions is what we need to drive productivity in our country right now.
Thanks very much, Madame Dancho. Mr. Bardisi, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'll start with Mr. Meyer. Just want to pick up on the points around applied research. Earlier in this committee, we heard about how it's important not just to take a global perspective on productivity numbers, but to really try to drill down in sectors and regions. And so could you just share with us from a Red River College perspective, what are the major areas that you think you have a role in advancing the productivity of the region of Winnipeg, southern Manitoba?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. And, I would say this holds true for many of the institutions. We're very focused regionally in the types of programs that we deliver. Our legislation that established our institution says that we've been established to focus on our labor market locally. And so that's the talent, the programs that we develop, and alongside of that, the applied research that we deliver as well. So for us, Advanced Manufacturing Mechatronics, as I mentioned, there's not only a technical access center that we have a new institute that's focused on that. We've opened the doors on some new facilities as well to really drive that. So from Manitoba specific, that's one. The other one that I would mention is transportation. We were a very early adopter of emerging propulsion systems and energy systems for large and heavy vehicles. And so our partnership with New Flyer Industries, who's a manufacturer of hydrogen and hybrid electric buses, is long-standing. We work very closely with them. We've developed facilities to help them test their equipment. We were their early stage developer of some of the recharging technologies associated with that as well. And then on the agricultural front, of course, in Manitoba and across the prairies, ag is a driver of what we do. We've got a very specific area called our Prairie Research Kitchen, which works on applied research on food development products. And it's unique because not only does it have the lab strength or the applied aspects around food development, but what it also has is a connection to our culinary program. So it really brings chefs into the equation on applied research and product development to get it ready for market. So those are some of the areas that we focus on. Energy efficiency is also a very strong one for us. We have a Building Efficiency Technical Access Center that works on improving the efficiencies of structures in construction as well.
Thank you. And I guess one of the features of what you've described is, Winnipeg has this quite unique position as being the major center, but quite distant from other major centers. So where do you tend to attract your student population from, and how does that speak to the kind of productivity challenges you see in the region?
Yeah, the majority of our students are local students. They would be domestic to Winnipeg, Manitoba. And a smaller proportion of that would be international students that we've attracted as well. What we find is that the retention of our graduates within Manitoba is very strong because of the high level of domestic students we have and the regional connections we have as well. We also have a very, very strong work integrated learning component. So this component ensures that all of our students have an opportunity to either have a work placement, a co-op, an internship, or work on a capstone project specific with a company or an employer. That level of high retention allows people to stay within Manitoba. It also allows them to be prepared to enter the labor market much quicker and without barriers.
Thank you. Now a couple questions for Ms. Knowles. Ms. Knowles, you're in a sector that has more of where the spending is more, I guess you could say, discretionary. The consumer spending has a more of a discretionary element. First, could you just share what you're what you're expecting this coming winter, what the trends are that you've heard from your members and the analysis you've done?
Ms. Knowles,
You cut it.
There you go. Yeah, you're good now.
Oh, okay. You could hear me now? Great. Yes, the trends for this winter, we're seeing increased outdoor recreation participation and spending. In general, it's been increasing rapidly since COVID. There's been a major increase in spending across outdoor recreation, participation in outdoor recreation. We are seeing impacts from climate change and other environmental factors and political factors influence how and where people are participating and therefore spending their money on outdoor recreation. Current relationships with the U.S. is leading to a greater increase in that domestic localized spending of outdoor recreation. So that's a positive for our outdoor recreation sectors in Canada, less people traveling across the borders for things like skiing and other activities that they would potentially do. So that's where we're seeing growth in the same sense that we saw during the period of COVID.
Thank you. Now, one of the conventional metrics for productivity that this committee has looked at is kind of increased output per worker. But in your sector, it's probably a bit harder to do that. So can you just share with us what your perspective is on this question of productivity as it relates to a sector like yours?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because when we look at productivity in that traditional sense, output per worker, what we actually see with outdoor recreation is the low requirement of resource input relative to labor, so less resource input, and in terms of economic output. And then outside of our specific sector, that increase in productivity, that increase in the effectiveness of workers in other sectors due to participation in outdoor recreation. So it's an interesting sector, and we often when we look at traditional economic impact metrics, it's much more difficult to assess and relate to other sectors, although we do see when we look at jobs and economic impact that we're at par with other sectors. And what we often are much more interested in the outdoor recreation sector is some of the more qualitative, difficult to measure economic impact assessment metrics. So looking beyond GDP, looking beyond direct productivity into some of the more social and well-being aspects that outdoor recreation provides to those within the sector, to the small businesses. It's generally built out of small local businesses, so looking at some of the contributions to local economies, regional economies, provincial economies, and then outward.
Thank you. That's very valuable for our work here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Bardisi. Monsieur Saint-Marie, bonjour.
Oui, bonjour.
Good morning, Mr. Saint-Marie. Over to you. Good morning, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here and for your testimony. I'm going to start with a few questions for Mr. Meyer. Thank you for your presentation. I'd like to come back to this question of intellectual property and innovation in colleges, universities and polytechnics. You've talked about partnerships with companies and the agriculture sector. Often we've heard that it's difficult in the Canadian economy to make sure that we can actually protect patents, intellectual property and innovation that comes out of the college and university sector, and also how they're transferred to companies to make sure that we can increase productivity. So could you please talk about that from your perspective?
Thank you for the question. And IP is a critical aspect of that productivity equation as well. And it usually comes from the feeling or the fact that IP is commercialized elsewhere. So it's discovered in Canada and commercialized elsewhere. And within that is an ecosystem that at certain points in time can be quite leaky or can be difficult to operate inside of. And so maybe I'll speak about this from what we believe the advantages of working with polytechnic institutions are in an applied nature. So the first one I spoke about was the barrier of reducing a barrier when, we'll take, for example, we have lab research and there's a researcher or somebody who's discovered that and wants to look towards commercialization of that. And so the first barrier that we think we reduce is by removing the sharing of IP by working inside of our institutions. It allows them to step into an environment where that threat isn't there. So that's the first part of it. The second part is the ability for us to connect with industry. So we have a wide network of industry partners that we work with on a regular basis. That connection allows us to provide that researcher, that person bringing the IP into our institution, to have a better sense of how that's connected. The other thing is the ability for us to move rapidly and understand the marketplace and what's required on that front. So for us to put in the necessary advice and development of a product, and then to also provide the skills and talent around sort of what are the next steps for commercialization? What are the business skills that you need to move that forward? So I would say, if we had a greater capacity within the Polytechnic College applied area, it would allow for more of that commercialization of that research within facilities that have the researchers and the know-how to do that. It's exactly what the Labs 4 initiative was focused on, the ability to connect with universities and colleges together as part of a network. So there's extremely valuable research that's done and discovered, and then we need to find a way to commercialize that. So taking it from the lab to the market and having polytechnics and colleges involved in that process.
Oh, ben, merci beaucoup, c'est très éclairant.
Thank you very much. That's very enlightening. Do you have recommendations to make to the federal government to facilitate these partnerships, these transfers, these links to increase productivity? Any recommendations?
Yeah, I'll go back to the research capacity at 3% of the overall funding that's available. I think that when you look at ourselves compared to OECD countries that focus on applied research, our investment on the applied side is well below where others are that have very strong productivity. So the first thing I would say is we need to find a way of increasing the investment in these applied research institutions going forward. I think more initiatives, we're going to learn a lot out of this initiatives on Labs 4, this ability to work with universities and others to create a much cleaner pathway for those researchers who have discovery research to move through a very supportive network. So, part of that is providing them funding in early stage. So, I mean, if you're, at a recent graduate, you're a researcher, you have to think about sort of getting by on day-to-day life as well. So providing stipends and supports for them to actually cultivate that research into something that's available. So the strong network of supports, not only on the research side at the front end and investing in applied research, but then investing in those researchers as well as they're commercializing their products as well.
Merci beaucoup. C'est très utile, très.
Thank you very much. That was very useful and enlightening. And I'm turning to Ms. Knowles. I've just got 1 minute, and I can come back to you in my second round of questions a bit later as well. Once again, thank you very much for your presentation. In the last answer that you provided, you were talking about indirect economic benefits. So I'd like to know whether you're talking about indirect jobs, SMEs and communities, or you're also talking about health benefits that are harder to capture directly in monetary terms, but they're certainly still there.
Both. Absolutely. The more qualitative aspects of the economic impact, those indirect economic factors, the small local businesses, resources staying within communities and support for rural economies is massive for our sector. We're predominantly seeing the benefits and the source of outdoor recreation economies in rural communities across Canada. And so it's providing those benefits in areas that are struggling in other sectors, especially with some of the transitions away from natural resource extraction industries. But then at the same time, those productivity and indirect benefits, the social and health benefits are massive for all Canadians, and that trickles throughout our workforce, throughout our productivity across other sectors, and our labor force in general. Having a healthy, stronger, happier, mentally strong workforce is hugely beneficial to the individual Canadians, all of our communities, and all of our businesses, and therefore our economy is built off of all those things. So it kind of starts right at that base of making sure that Canadians are healthy and happy, and outdoor recreation really provides that across the board. And it's such a diverse thing, and it's something that transcends, political background, all the dimensions of diversity. So it's something that's it impacts all Canadians, and we see, there's 80% of Canadians report participating in outdoor recreation. It's a key piece of our culture as well, and the diversity means that there's just opportunities for it to impact any Canadian, whether somebody that's walking on a trail or somebody that's, mountain biking down a crazy mountain. It's something that impacts and is beneficial to everybody, and so can provide that uniting piece and build productivity from that workforce level, as well as it's,
Merci, Monsieur Saint-Marie. Mr. Guglielmi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saint-Marie.
And thank you to both of the witnesses for your testimony. Mr. Meyer, I'm going to start with you. I guess we're here at the end of our productivity and capital flight study, and there's the theme that we've been hearing over and over again is how we're in a productivity crisis in Canada. I was just wondering if you could provide the committee with your thoughts on what you think the major contributors to our current state of productivity is.
Thank you very much for the question. I've touched on some of the aspects of applied research and actually funding applied research so that we can advance productivity. But I'm going to turn my attention a little bit more on the skills mismatch, which I think the country is faced with right now. As you know, the committee has likely heard, we're one of the leaders in the OECD when it comes to post-secondary attainment. But what we're finding is, and what I hear routinely from those that are looking for talent and skills, is that there is a mismatch between those that are applying for positions and their ability to actually be ready for work. And by that I mean, you know, those that actually have the work skills and able to sort of plug right in and help industry. A part of that is work integrated learning. We're hearing lots about work integrated learning. We're hearing lots about the fact that we need to have students who have experience coming through the system. And you know, it's a hallmark of what we do in polytechnics and colleges inside of Canada. We've done this for a long period of time through either work placements or through internships, as I said before, or capstone projects where students are working on actual projects from industry as well. But I don't think we're getting the amount of people at the doors of polytechnics and colleges soon enough in their learning journey. What we're seeing is that our average age of learners that we see at our door is in their mid to late 20s. And so what that means when we dig into it is that they have some other post-secondary learning inside of our country. They've gone somewhere else. They've gone to a university, for example. And then when they're looking for employment, a stronger employment outcome, they're coming to the doors of polytechnics and colleges. What other countries have done and what they've been quite successful at doing is reducing that average age down, finding a short circuit so that we can tell the story within Canada that if you go to a college or polytechnic, your education is going to connect you to employment. You're going to have the skills necessary to do that as well. But for too long, we have said that there is not parity in esteem between educational outcomes, that one type of education has a stronger outcome than another. They're both equally important, and we have to stand both up equally. We need policies that are developed based on that parity of esteem. We need to have investment that follows that as well so that we can have those people ready. Statistics are showing that the youth unemployment for people with bachelor degrees is far exceeding that of those that graduate with colleges or polytechnic education, vocational types of education, and that gap is just widening and widening. If we're thinking about doing things like nation-building projects, the people for those projects, the people we're going to need to advance that type of work are exactly the type of people coming out of our institutions.
So Polytechnics Canada reports that about 50% of industry partners who engage with institutions like yours see tangible benefits from the partnership. Just wondering if you could provide the committee with a clear example of maybe an industry partnership with Red River where the company saw some benefit to their productivity or output.
Yeah, I'll use an example. I didn't speak about it earlier, but the aerospace industry is a large industry here in Manitoba. We've got a long history of that. Magellan Aerospace, which is a long-standing defense contractor and aerospace company, has worked quite closely with us. One of the projects that we work closely with them is on advanced composite manufacturing. And so this is exactly that story I told you about, which is that NRC has developed some research around advanced composites. That was bench research. We've taken it into our facility, worked with Magellan Aerospace on advanced composite forming products. That's now to the point where it's going to be implemented on one of their aircraft. It's going to reduce, it's going to increase their development of the product and less defects with it, and it's going to reduce their turnaround, immensely. It'll make them have the ability to procure other types of contracts into that facility, global contracts into that facility. And so when we talk about how do you increase productivity per unit of labor, that's an exact example of a company inside of Manitoba that has reduced the amount of time and increased the product quality based on working in our facility.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gugelmin. Mr. Baines, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. I'm going to begin with Ms. Knowles. You spoke a lot about active living and how it can contribute to productivity. My hometown, Richmond, British Columbia, recently was the recipient of the Most Active City Award from Participaction. We also have the longest life expectancy in Canada. And my question to you is, in the budget, we announced a Build Community Strong Fund, which amounts to about $3 billion a year for the next 10 years. Where do you think those funds should be directed? Do you believe facilities, active living facilities, should be a focus of those funds, and the applications coming from municipalities should be a focus of those funds to ensure that if there is a direct, like you're saying, direct correlation between active living and productivity?
Yes, absolutely. That's a really exciting piece of funding that's come out, and I think active living and specifically access to nature has been proven to be really beneficial for productivity. We've seen Parks RX, initiative out of BC Parks Foundation, driven by healthcare, is pushing for providing prescriptions to outdoor recreation, and specifically within nature. So providing green space, access to trails, and different sorts of low-impact outdoor recreation. And it's a really low capital-intensive way to provide equitable access to all Canadians to outdoor recreation. We've got incredible natural spaces and things as simple as, supporting trail networks or green spaces that people can access without difficulty. So public transit to these areas and things like that can do exactly that, provide those productivity enhancements through creating a healthy, resilient workforce. Physical and mental health and social well-being are all significant research is existing on these points, as well as it's continuing to come out, those health benefits, and we're seeing integration between outdoor recreation, productivity, and our healthcare systems as healthcare providers are increasingly integrating nature and outdoor recreation into their.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to switch over to Mr. Meyer. I spent some time teaching as an instructor in applied communications at Kwantlen Polytechnic University in Richmond, British Columbia, and it also offers several areas of research. The campus in Richmond offers Applied Genomics Center, Institute for Sustainable Food Systems, and research services. This in proposal preparation and other areas as well. My question to you is, we've seen a considerable amount of drop in enrollment, of course, with some of the changes in the immigration levels for international students. How do we attract domestic students? Is there an opportunity to increase collaboration? You may have noted there is a piece in the budget that talks about skills trading, upgrading skills with partnership through unions. Maybe there's other private industry. I recently visited the BCIT Marine and Machine campus on Annacis Island, and there we saw private industry like Snap-on Tools contributing to the classrooms by donating tools. So there's a couple of pieces I want to talk a little bit about is the collaboration from industry. How do we attract a next generation of students who may be, reestablishing the respect of trades or skilled trades? If you can talk a little bit about that.
Thank you. I'll touch on recruitment first, which is always on our minds. I would say, even before the international student changes. So I'll speak from our perspective. Our RC Polytech has seen an increase in domestic enrollment over the last few years. Year over year, we're somewhere between 8 and 10%, depending on the last year that we're at. So, it's been very strong, especially, coming out of the pandemic as well. I think the key to, recruitment and increasing recruitment is speaking more about the types of careers and the types of education that you can have in a college or polytechnic. And I don't think we talk about that enough. I think there's a default way that we think about polytechnics and colleges and the careers that come out of them. A lot of times people still look at them the same way, which were, their origins, which were trade schools. And you would leave in a trade. And what we don't talk about right now is the fact that, we've got machine learning and data science programs, which are at the core of artificial intelligence. In Winnipeg, we've got a video game programming and video game design program that's at the heart of an industry that's growing rapidly, that we've got engineering technologists that work on robotics and automation. And so we've cast ourselves in this country and the way that we think of our narrative that, we're thinking about the education that comes out of these or the careers as that ones are not modern or digital. I just went through an HVAC program the other day, and the amount of digital sensors and equipment that they have to use and the high level of skill that's associated with that would be very, a lot of people would be shocked by it. So, these are digital skills. These are the future skills that people are graduating with. And then on industry investment, we've got strong industry partners. They're in it because they want to attract more graduates, and they know there are fees associated with that as well. And so they're moving forward and partnering on that front. And we've got deep partnerships with many. And it still is a heavy lift. There's still a significant gap, and we know that in colleges and polytechnics across the country, the change in international students has had a dramatic impact for us as well. So, but we do have very strong partnerships because they're attracting the talent directly out of our institutions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baines. Monsieur Saint-Marie, 2 minutes 30 secondes à vous.
You have 2.5 minutes, Mr. Saint-Marie. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Knowles, could you give us some more details and examples as to how outdoor tourism could be used as part of sustainable economic and social development?
Yes. So we've seen the outdoor recreation sector in the U.S. It was in the same state as ours, very disconnected. A lot of diverse subsectors not working together and not having that full understanding of the economic impact of the sector completely. They've come together in the same way that we are organizing to bring the outdoor recreation sector together. It's diverse in terms of activity, and it's diverse across our nation, what that means rurally, urban, and cross-provincially. And by bringing this sector together and really accounting for the economic impact, as has been done in the U.S., with the support of their federal government through their Bureau of Economic Impact, similar to our Stats Canada, if we can better account for what our outdoor recreation sector looks like, and that includes aspects of tourism, but not completely. It's a sector that overlaps, but not entirely. And outdoor recreation, it really, like I've mentioned before, has a greater impact for Canadians and Canadian businesses and the Canadian workforce and economy. So the more that we can account for what our outdoor recreation economy fully encapsulates and what those impacts are having and where those impacts are across Canada, the better that we can invest and create policies that support it and direct funding, as our last questioner just mentioned, into ways that can actually really support productivity across our entire workforce. So if we can really have a better, more detailed understanding of our outdoor recreation economy, what we've done is a preliminary look and what we see is really exciting. It's a massive sector. It's really comparable with some of our other sectors that are facing other, political or economic or environmental challenges. And ours is seeing growth throughout all of that and growth within our country. And so the more that we can understand the sector, the more that we can direct policy and funding to better support this sector itself, as well as then support the productivity and the workforce and Canadians and communities across our country.
Bien, merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Saint-Marie.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for your testimony here at committee this morning. Mr. Meyer, I'd like to at least begin with you with some questions. It's good to see you again. Welcome to committee. The Technology Access Centre for Aerospace Manufacturing is something that you briefly alluded to on my colleague's previous question. I'm wondering, you've got a couple of those centers of excellence. Can you explain the positive benefits so far as that programming would contribute towards productivity in that industry, entrepreneurship, building a talent base in Canada? Can you also briefly talk about if we're losing the talent pool that we graduate to the United States or whether they're staying domestically?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, technical access centers, we have 3 of those. I've mentioned the Building Efficiency and the Prairie Research Kitchen, which is our food one. And the other one is our Technical Access Center for Advanced Manufacturing and Aerospace, which has been one of our longer standing ones as well. And so what that Technical Access Center does is it provides funding for us to have researchers inside of it with industry experience that can work with our manufacturing sector or our aerospace sector. I mentioned one of them earlier, being Magellan Aerospace, who's sort of accessing the facilities and the equipment that we have and the researchers that we have in that area. But there are many small manufacturers, and this is a piece that I just want to focus on, many small manufacturers that don't have the internal capacity or the funding to advance product development and are looking for an ability to move that forward. In fact, when we did our Price Institute of Advanced Manufacturing and Mechatronics, we did a survey of industry, and many of them were SMEs. And there's one comment that really captured it for me, and the one comment was, we just need an easy button. An SME who maybe has 30 or 40 employees, we just need an easy button on research and innovation, on prototyping, and let us deliver that for us. Now, we're not an easy button, but we're a part of that in my mind. We've got the facilities, we've got the equipment. We just don't have the necessary resources to meet all of the demand that's out there right now. And the biggest fear that we have is that the competition and in the marketplace is very fierce, and the disruption because of technologies right now is large as well. And we're not sure that the SMEs actually have the capacity necessary to do that. So that's one piece. You've talked about the flight of talent. I would say in our institutions, the flight of talent isn't as great out of our institutions. And the reason for that is the point that I mentioned earlier, whereas we have deep integration with industry. So the reason people leave, I would say, mostly is because of employment opportunities. Most of our students, have multiple opportunities directly before graduating. We just recently had a career fair, and every large company was there looking for talent among our students. So I would say we don't have the flight risk of talent that perhaps others do because of that strong integration with industry and work experience very early on. Many of them don't even hit the job market. They're scooped up by those that are working with them right now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meyer. And that pretty well brings my time to a close here. But I do just want to acknowledge the tremendous good work that you're doing through Red River. You've got a facility and a campus in my district and riding of Provencher. And I know it's very well supported by the community, and you produce excellent graduates. So thank you very much. Mr. Chair, at this time, I'd like to cede the rest of my time to Ms. Dancho.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to move that we resume debate on the motion we put forward last Wednesday. And Mr. Chair, I have quite a bit to say about the Liberal amendment, but in the spirit of collaboration, I would say that I can pause my remarks and we can pick back up with me after we're done with witnesses, or I can go into it now, but I would just put the question to you before I cede the floor.
So a couple of things here, colleagues. The first is witnesses were, my gut tells me, about to embark on a few minutes worth of discussions here. And given that there was only 5 minutes of questioning left, I think it would probably be fair to the time that you have left in your day to do productive things, no pun intended, to let you go now. So I want to thank you very much, Mr. Meyer and Ms. Knowles, for appearing before us today. We appreciate your testimony and wish you a good rest of your day. Colleagues, so there's been a little bit of confusion just about where we go at this point, so I just want to clarify that. As you recall, last week, and Ms. Dancho, just so that I'm clear, this is the auto sector motion you're referring to. Okay. So we had a motion put forward related to the auto sector. There was an amendment adopted that was put forward by Monsieur Saint-Marie, which altered the original form of the motion. There was then an amendment that was proposed by Mr. Noor Mohammed, who was subbing in at the committee at that point. We will resume now a study of the motion as the proposed amendment that was put forward by Mr. Noor Mohammed directed us to undertake. So in other words, we will begin debate on this motion, but it is not the original motion and then the amendment with that was put forward by the bloc and adopted. It is on the amendment that Mr. Noor Mohammed put forward. And I just want to verify with the clerk that we have that language. I can't remember if it was circulated or not. I'm seeing the amendment wasn't. Okay. So, colleagues, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to suspend briefly in a moment because we need to work off that language. It kind of happened really quickly at the end, and if it hasn't been distributed yet, then that's going to be important for us because I don't actually know exactly which specific language we're working off of. So you have to give me a moment on that. Madame Dancho has not ceded the floor. I'm seeing hands up here. Are these on points of order, or this is simply just to get onto the speaking list? Okay, so I had Mr. Bardisi followed by Madame O'Rourke, and I've got Madame Dancho who will resume the floor. Once we come back from suspension. So, and I'm seeing some...
Appel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
On point of order, Chair? Yes, go ahead. Once you've got the wording of the amendment from the Liberal Party, please tell us whether you judge it's admissible or not, or whether it changes too much the original motion. Could you repeat that, Mr. Saint-Marie? What was the last part that you were talking about there? Yes, I'd like to know, once we've got the wording of the amendment proposed by the Liberal Party, could you, as Chair, tell us if you think it's admissible or not, given that it substantially changes the motion as already amended? Well, up until now, I haven't received anything from anyone who has asked me to judge something. Now, if you want me to do that, Mr. Samarino, I'll leave it up to other colleagues to judge that. Well, up until now, yes, it is admissible. It's in order.
To be really clear here, I've got Madame Dancho on the motion, followed by Mr. Bardisi, followed by Madame O'Rourke, followed by Mr. Falk, followed by Mr. Guglielmin. I'm going to suspend briefly for the purposes of allowing the language to be distributed.
Et si vous voulez mettre mon nom sur la liste.
And could you please put my name on the list? Yes, I've taken note of your hand as well, Mr. Saint-Marie.
Thanks. Okay, colleagues, we are resuming debate. So everyone should have been provided with a paper copy, except for you, Monsieur Saint-Marie. Malheureusement, c'est difficile de t'envoyer un...
Unfortunately, it's hard for us to send you a piece of paper when you're up there in Quebec, but there is an e-copy that's been sent to you. Same thing for you, Madame Borelli.
The floor belonged to Madame Dancho. Madame Dancho, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity. This is the first opportunity the Conservatives have had to speak to the Liberal amendment from last Wednesday. And I have a number of concerns, Mr. Chair. Certainly, we'll start with the positive. One thing I do appreciate is that they brought in steel and aluminum and softwood lumber. As you know, Mr. Chair, Conservatives have been trying to secure debates in the House of Commons on these things. We successfully secured a take-note debate on softwood lumber. We would love a concurrence debate on that, which, as you know, is more formal, involves voting and parties taking a position. We have tried to secure an emergency debate on steel and aluminum back on June 4th of this year and on autos of October 20th this year. Those were both denied, unfortunately, by the Speaker. But really do believe that these industries require a fulsome debate in the House of Commons, that members of Parliament should get to, from all of those regions, weigh in on the impacts that it is having and the critical nature of this trade war and the need to get good deals on behalf of Canadians. And so you would have seen, Mr. Chair, in the original form of our motion that it would have had it passed, it would have gone to the House and would have triggered likely a concurrence debate, a formal debate where positions need to be taken, a vote needs to be had, 3 hours of debate would be undertaken. So really, while we appreciate steel and aluminum coming in there and softwood lumber, and we very much have asked for and would ask for debates on those and would support any motion by the Liberals or ourselves, of course, put forward to trigger any debates on that, because the Liberal amendment fundamentally altered the purpose of our motion, which was to have a concurrence debate in the House. We feel as Conservatives very much that it is out of order, and I would ask, and that it is inadmissible, and I'd ask that you make a ruling on that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madame Dancho. I've heard your request. Just provide me one moment to confer something with something with the clerk. Okay, thank you, Madame Dancho. I don't see, in my estimation, that striking out the report to the House really fundamentally changes the spirit of the motion. So that would be my ruling, is that it's admissible. Okay,
Mr. Chair, I appreciate that. Respectfully, though, I'd have to formally challenge your ruling on that.
No problem.
Thank you.
Colleagues, for those of you that might be new to this particular process, this is a dilatory motion. In other words, there's no debate. We move immediately. So the question is whether or not the chair's ruling is sustained. Just for clarity, sustained in the positive, meaning that if you vote yes, you are supporting the chair's ruling, and if you vote no, you're voting to overturn the chair's ruling, just so that we are aware. This one's a little bit more formal, so I am going to turn to the clerk to call the roll on this one.
On the motion, shall the chair's ruling be sustained? Mr. Bardesi?
Yes.
Mr. Baines?
Yes.
Ms. Akan?
Yes.
Ms. O'Rourke?
Yes.
Ms. Borelli?
No.
Ms. Dancho?
No.
Mr. Falk?
No.
Mr. Gouglin?
No.
Monsieur Saint-Marie?
Non.
Yeas pour 4, nays contre 5, 5.
Okay, colleagues, democracy in action. The chair's decision has been overturned. Therefore, the debate on the motion as presented will not continue. The amendment, that's correct. So, Madame Dancho, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in brief, just to clarify then what happens next, that we resume debate on the motion as amended by the bloc, correct? Just want to clarify where we're at.
Just one moment again,
Thank
Madam
you.
Dancho.
If that is the case, then we don't.
Yes, that is correct, Madame Dancho. So we are now resuming debate on the motion as it had been amended with the block amendment last week.
Chair?
Yep.
Sorry, I don't know if this is a point of order, but could we get that motion distributed?
That motion's been distributed, Mr. Bardizzi. Everybody should have that from last week. Happy to give members an opportunity to review it if necessary. So I'll give it just a minute here. Okay. All right. So, colleagues, I think everybody's got this. Madame Dancho, that was everything? Okay. I had a hand. Mr. Bardizzi, you're satisfied?
Yeah.
Okay. I had a hand from Madame O'Rourke. Is this on a point of order or?
No, I just want to be on the speaking list when we get there.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Bardizzi. Okay. Well, colleagues, did you have your hand up, Mr. Falk?
Well, I had it up right after that one was dropped, so a new speaking list.
You did. So that speaking list is now moot because we are no longer on that. So we are now debating the motion as amended last week. I have Madame O'Rourke, I have Mr. Bardizzi, I have Mr. Baines.
Just before that, as soon as we agreed that that motion was no longer in place and that we would be discussing the amended motion from the block, my hand went up and you acknowledged it.
Okay, Mr. Falk, my understanding, two things there. One, my understanding was that your hand was to speak to the amendment as it had been presented. We don't have, we can't add to the speaking list while we're not on a particular debate. So your hand was up in relation, so far as I understood it, to the amendment, even if you meant that you had your hand up in relation to the main.
That was the previous one.
Right, but we weren't on that, so we didn't have the ability to actually create a speaking list on that at that point. Yeah, but I can add your name.
No.
I can add your name to this. No? Okay. All right. So I have Madame O'Rourke, I have Mr. Bardizzi, and I have Mr. Baines. This is a conversation now, colleagues, on the motion as presented by Madame Dancho originally, amended by the Bloc as we agreed upon last meeting. We all good? Okay. Madame O'Rourke, the floor is yours.
Just speaking to the amendment, Mr. Chair, I think that the sectors, while related, are fairly distinct because you would have.
We're not speaking to the amendment anymore. We're speaking to the amended motion.
That's right, Mr. Falk.
So
Yep. What's
Madam
the point of
O'Rourke
order
says
in
she's
relation
speaking
to?
the amendment, and she should be speaking to the motion.
Okay, Madame O'Rourke, I suspect when you say amendment, you mean the motion as amended and not Mr. Noor Mohammed's amendment?
So I'm seeking clarification, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
I actually had to excuse myself at the end of the meeting last week to go and attend the December 6th commemorations, which was an all-party event. So I appreciated that Mr. Noor Mohammed was here. So my understanding is we are talking about the Bloc amendment right now? No.
No. Okay. So,
Okay.
colleagues, let me do my best to
Thank you.
do my best to hit reset. And I'm going to have a very brief chronology of what happened. Last meeting, Madame Dancho put forward a motion on the auto sector. As we were debating it, Monsieur Saint-Marie put forward an amendment. That amendment was adopted. So now the motion is being debated as amended. Then Mr. Noor Mohammed put forward an amendment. I ruled that that amendment was in order. Madame Dancho challenged the chair's ruling. The chair's ruling was overturned. Therefore, pretend as though Mr. Noor Mohammed's amendment didn't happen at all because it's not it's not admissible by virtue of the vote that overturned the chair's ruling. Now we are reverting back to debate on the motion, but remember that the motion was amended once with the block addition. So you have the floor, and you have the floor in relation to the motion as amended by the block. Good? Okay. Is that all right, colleagues? That made sense? Okay, Madame O'Rourke.
I appreciate the committee's indulgence
No,
to get me up to speed. You
I
all
understand,
know.
I understand it can be difficult
you all
to keep
know
track.
this is an issue that is so dear to my heart. I chair the Liberal Auto Caucus. There are over 16,500 jobs in my riding of Guelph that are related to manufacturing, at least 12,000 of them directly related. And so this is really critically important. And the reason that I upheld the chair's ruling on the original amendment is because what is before the House right now.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
I'm speaking to the motion.
Madame Dancho, or excuse me, Madame O'Rourke, I do have to address points of order as they come up, so I'll just ask you to hold momentarily. Madame Dancho?
Please correct me, Mr. Chair, but I don't believe we can, there is no debate for the challenge, and Mr. O'Rourke is trying to make a debate for that vote, but that there is no opportunity to do that. The vote has passed. She also can't speak to the amendment which no longer exists. So I just want to, I believe that that's correct, Mr. Chair.
I'm not, yeah, I mean, I think we're about 30 seconds into Madame O'Rourke's testimony here, and we've had 3 points of order. So Madame O'Rourke, I allow you to continue. I suspect you're getting to the amendment, to the motion as amended at hand. We do have to keep relevant to that. Colleagues, this is relevance in this instance, I think, is quite broadly defined, but Madame O'Rourke, I'll allow you to continue.
I appreciate that. Had I been given 30 more seconds, then I certainly would have concluded the point. The point being that before the House of Commons right now, especially before the holiday recess, we are looking at the Budget Implementation Act, which actually implements a number of measures that will be beneficial to the auto sector. And that the time of the House is precious, and that there's also a motion that will allow for this conversation to take place. So in the interest of using the time in the House wisely to actually help the auto sector and the workers in the auto sector, there are a number of things that we need the House time for, and those include the immediate expensing for manufacturing investments. So that productivity super deduction is going to be extremely helpful for the automotive sector and manufacturing writ large. And it's going to allow a business to write off the full cost of eligible investments in the first year, improving their cash flow and competitiveness, particularly compared to U.S. tax rules. Those provisions will be fully in place until 2030, with a gradual phase-out thereafter. However, the reason it's so critical to pass this is it will allow businesses to make their decisions for the coming year, to invest in productivity, which was the point of the study that we just concluded, and is really critical in terms of their ongoing competitivity and will be good for the auto sector. The other thing that's in the budget that's going to be very helpful for the auto sector are the scientific research and experimental development enhancements. So we know them as SHRED grants. So we want to streamline administration for science research and experimental development, reduce the red tape, and improve access for innovators. This is what's in Budget 2025. This is what we should be talking about and passing as quickly as possible. You know, we talk in this committee about productivity, and now here we are trying to slow the implementation of these important measures that will support productivity for our automakers. So it's also very exciting for manufacturers, and also Guelph has a number of CNC machinists, a lot of auto parts manufacturers. They feed into the broader auto sector. Increasing the expenditure limit for those SHRED tax incentives, increasing from $4.5 million to $6 million, encouraging R&D in automotive technologies and advanced manufacturing, that's important. So the auto sector, of course, is critically important, and there are measures on the table to support the sector. There is action being taken. Now, there's also a concurrent debate where we can get to that. The other piece that is directly related to the auto sector that is critical to pass before the holidays is the Strategic Response Fund and tariff mitigation. That's $5 billion over 6 years through the Strategic Response Fund to help manufacturers respond to tariffs, adopt new technologies, and modernize production lines. This is urgent for a number of small and medium-sized businesses in my riding, Mr. Chair. The regional development agencies have over $1 billion over 3 years via the Regional Tariff Response Initiative for automation, new equipment, production expansion. FedDev is working directly with these businesses to help them orient possibly to other sectors, but this is also really very important for the auto sector. The Clean Technology Manufacturing Tax Credits are also in Budget 2025, also need to be implemented as soon as possible. So this will help manufacturers who are investing in clean technology and advanced production to access federal credits to cover a significant portion of capital expenditures for eligible equipment and solutions. So those incentives will aim to reduce environmental impact while improving efficiency in auto manufacturing. So that actually helps Canada, right? This helps Canada to reach both our manufacturing economic goal, our protection and support of tariff-affected sectors, and meet environmental commitments at the same time. So it is important to use the House time to pass these measures. The climate competitiveness strategy, also in this budget, is part of that. So how do we use our energy, our resources? We've heard from a number of witnesses who are telling us that the polytechnics and the universities, they want to work with our advanced manufacturers, including the automakers, including the auto parts manufacturers. Let's give them the tools now to proceed with that. Other auto sector-specific actions. Earlier in 2025, the government announced a $2 billion investment to strengthen auto manufacturing and support Canadian workers, focusing on job creation and skills development. The government also took steps to protect Canadian auto production by adjusting import remission quotas for automakers that failed to meet domestic production commitment. This committee had 3 meetings where the Minister of Industry came and talked to us about the measures in place to fight for our automakers and every auto sector job. And so we are talking about that, but more importantly, especially in light of a discussion on productivity, there's action that can be taken, and we do need to use the House time to do that. What is encouraging right now in the auto sector is that we are seeing Nexstar in Windsor hiring for the battery plant. So the EV and battery supply chain, there are also investments in that in Budget 2025. So what we want to be doing is to be supporting those industries so that they can continue to hire, retain, grow their workforce and their innovation. So, Mr. Speaker, I talk about the auto sector all the time in my community, in the Auto Caucus, in this committee. I think my colleagues aren't sure I can talk about many other things, but it is so critical right now. We need a Team Canada approach on this. We need to be cautious in what we are saying in our legislature, lest it attract more ire, more counter tariffs, more negativity in the conversation. I'd like to see a Team Canada approach to bring forward these supports by using the time in the House to support the industry and the workers directly. The other piece that's in the budget, Mr. Chair, is the expansion of employment insurance, right? These things have to be anticipated and included in the budget so that when there are issues, that there can be work sharing, that we can enhance the supports for our workers and to speed up the time in which they receive those allowances. But we need to pass the Budget Implementation Act. These are supports for our workers. So is the training, the retraining for people who are potentially displaced, not necessarily in the auto sector, but in other sectors. So we know that the opposition has already voted against all of these measures to support the auto sector, and I think that's unfortunate. I'd be happy to have a debate about that, Mr. Chair. But I think that what we need to be doing really is moving forward the supports for industry. We've had countless witnesses come and tell us what they need for productivity. And guess what? It is accelerated depreciation, it's more skilled workers, it's improved shred credits, right? That have faster processes. But we need to pass the budget in order to make that a reality. That's the whole point of the productivity study. And speaking of productivity, I'm just going to pull it up here. Sorry, Mr. Chair. There is a motion that went through the International Trade Committee, and I believe that it reads, the committee report to the House that it condemns the unjustified American tariffs, and we all agree on that. The tariffs are completely unjustified. They are damaging to our economy, and notwithstanding that, our sectors are holding their own. Thank God. Because our workers are the best in the world. We've heard Linda Hasenfratz here at committee. She's on record in the news talking about how we have the best labor force in the world and that she's keeping her operations here. So we can agree on condemning the unjustified American tariffs. I think we want to be cautious also, though, to not be provoking any additional actions. So just going back to the international trade motion, the committee report to the House that it condemns the unjustified American tariffs on the Canadian steel, aluminum, automotive, and softwood lumber industries, and that it calls upon the government to live up to the promise it made in the election to negotiate a win, and that all parties wish to see the government succeed in getting a good deal for Canada and its workers also fully agree, as well as the deployment of aid programs for affected sectors. So, Mr. Speaker, there's already going to be a discussion in the House of Commons on all of these sectors. There's already going to be condemnation of unjustified American tariffs. We already agree that, of course, we would like to negotiate a win, and those negotiations are ongoing and could be jeopardized if we're not cautious about what we're saying. I think that we need to be supporting our automakers, our auto workers, and that the part really that is interesting in this motion is it says, as well as the deployment of aid programs for affected sectors. That's what's in the budget. Of course we want to do that, Mr. Chair. Of course we want to do that, but guess what? We have a limited amount of time in the House to approve the budget, to approve the deployment of aid programs for affected sectors. And that will be a better use of our time. Tout simplement, Monsieur le Président.
Quite simply, Chair. Time is a very precious resource. And in the context of a study on productivity, it's important to be responsible in how we use this time and how we use the House of Commons resources. And Canadians are awaiting the adoption of this bill so that we can support our workers, support our businesses, and so that we can actually have this 1% reduction in tax. There's many, many measures in the budget that are going to be very useful for Canadians. We already have a motion before the House to talk about these matters that are before us. And I could, of course, defend the Canadian auto sector all day long, its workers, the innovation and the whole supply chain involved. And I'd be happy to do that within the context of the debate that has been referred to the House of Commons by the International Trade Committee. Perhaps I haven't got the right name there for the committee, says the Speaker, but it's not necessary to hold this debate twice. We need to tread carefully and make sure what we're going to say during this debate. It's our responsibility to support workers, industries, and finally get the budget adopted so that we can implement the measures contained in Budget 2025. Thank you, Chair.
Much, Madame O'Rourke. Mr. Bardisi, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. And I want to thank my colleague, Ms. O'Rourke, for her interventions, which I support, and also want to say that I'm going to be speaking about this motion and have some considerations with this motion that I think are in the spirit of the work that this committee has already done. And I'm going to have my remarks in a few parts. First, I'm going to talk about what this committee has achieved, because I think it's important to lift that out, to point that out, and to put a bit of a spotlight on it. My colleague, Ms. O'Rourke, started with some of that. And I want to, share my appreciation for the members in the Conservative and Bloc caucuses who brought together this request for this emergency study that we did do. And I'll just quote from their letter. This request follows the announcement that Stellantis will move production of the Jeep Compass from its Brampton facility to Illinois, putting 3,000 Canadian jobs at risk. And so, I think on this side, we felt that this was worthy of further examination, and we committed 3 meetings to that study. And we had the opportunity in those 3 meetings to hear from a variety of important stakeholders. We heard from the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. We heard from the Global Automakers of Canada. We heard from the Auto Parts Manufacturers Association. We heard from the auto dealers. And we heard directly from Stellantis. And we also heard from Unifor and from Minister Joly. And that was not so long ago, but let's just remember the context of those meetings. The context of those meetings were in relation to the Stellantis announcement, but also it was also in the context of GM's announcement around the future of the Ingersoll plant and the planned product, the Bright Drop vehicle that was planned for production there. And it was also in the context, I think, of ongoing trade negotiations and the concerns raised by the other side around a deal that had not been reached, and in debate, including in this committee, we, I think, asserted that we didn't want to just make any deal, but that we thought it was important to have a deal that was best interest of Canada. And our government, supported, in fact, by Ms. Payne at this committee, said that this was no deal was better than a bad deal. And so that was some of that context just over a month ago. And if people recall what happened at the committee, it was actually quite an important set of moments at that committee, because what happened was we got some testimony. We also heard from officials at Industry Canada about the specific investments that were made, because we know that there were some questions about those investments from the opposition side. And what happened at this committee? Well, at this committee, and the further context I should add, was Minister Joly's letter to Antonio Filosa, Chief Executive Officer of Stellantis, dated October 15th. And I think the committee's action was also in the context of some very clear government action. And so her letter begins as follows. I'm writing following calls yesterday with the Government of Canada and Stellantis to express my extreme concern with Stellantis' investment plans in Canada, and to demand that the company respect its obligations flowing from billions of dollars of financial support extended to you over decades. While the current U.S. tariff environment is creating complex challenges, Stellantis has made important commitments to Canada and to its workforce. Canadians expect that Stellantis will respect and honour these commitments. Anything short of this is unacceptable. Should Stellantis choose not to respect its obligations, we will act in the interests of all Canadians and hold the company to full account and exercise all options, including legal. And I'm going to get to, I'll just end quote there for a moment, and I'll get to some of the results of this committee's work in a little bit. But in the meantime, let me continue quoting from Minister Joly's letter of October 15th. Over decades, Stellantis and the Government of Canada have built a strong and enduring partnership. We were there for the company in 2009 to pull it back from the brink of bankruptcy, and now we expect you to be there for Canadians. We work diligently for the long-term viability of Stellantis' Canadian operations, with millions of vehicles having been produced at Brampton and Windsor. Your new joint venture with LG Energy Solutions represents an important investment in the future of electrification. Our work together served to anchor your investments in Canada, a market where you continue to sell over 150,000 vehicles annually, and to deliver meaningful economic benefits to workers and communities alike. Just want to pause there in my quoting of the letter and just note that the facility that Minister Joly is referring to is a fairly newly constructed facility, and I know one that members on this side have visited, and presumably I know it's a facility that is of specific interest to Ms. Borelli on this committee. Continuing to quote from the letter. Et je vais juste changer en français.
And I'll just switch to French because the minister wrote the letter in the two official languages and it was communicated to the company and the public. The trade decisions to transfer the production of Jeep Compass is unacceptable. It compromises the future of Brampton and its unionized workforce. It's essential for you to quickly identify new missions for Brampton to guarantee that this plant is still at the heart of your industrial footprint and the contracts with Canadian suppliers are respected. It's imperative that you extend the Workers' Transition Programme agreed on with Unifor up until 2027 at least. Stellantis has agreed together with the Canadian government and the province of Ontario to integrate all of its Canadian footprint, including Brampton, in exchange for substantial financial support, and any failure to respect this agreement will be considered as a violation or infringement of our agreements, and in particular, legally binding commitments taken up by Stellantis by accepting support from the Strategic Innovation Fund and the special contribution agreement with Nexstar Energy have to be respected. We're ready to sit down at the bargaining table with you, all levels of government and union leaders, to ensure a positive future for our workers and all those who are part of the supply chain for parts and other accessories. We appreciate our strategic partnership and we believe that respect for these commitments is essential to show the continuous commitment of Stellantis towards Canada, and we are eagerly awaiting a plan to ensure the long-term success of Stellantis Ontario and the whole of Canada.
This committee's deliberations, and we were fortunate to have this letter in the public record when we heard from Stellantis and Stellantis's then Canadian president, who appeared before this committee virtually. You know, and I don't have I know the Hansard sometimes takes a bit of time to catch up, so I'm not sure if we have the Hansard of that committee hearing available yet. But I do recall, and I think all members of this committee were fairly unified in its concern shared with Stellantis around its choice, a choice that we later learned was made with almost no notice to any government player. And we expressed our deep concern that this action was unacceptable, echoing and supporting what Minister Joly had said in her letter. This was before Minister Joly came to the committee, of course. And I believe this committee's work in helping hold Stellantis to account for its commitments had an effect. It had an effect in that it increased public pressure and also created the context for Minister Joly's appearance at this committee. An appearance that, if we recall, had the result of having her announce publicly that she was initiating the 30-day process for mediation under the terms of the strategic under the terms of the agreements. And I'll just say parenthetically, in respect to those agreements, my colleague Madame O'Rourke referred to these agreements as items that are the Strategic Response Fund, which is the evolution of the Strategic Innovation Fund, is an item that is part of this government's budget that we have, the budget motion we have now passed, and now we have the Budget Implementation Act, which is before the House, and which we want to have the House's full attention. That is part of that legislative framework, and that is being considered by this House now, and that was being referred to in this letter. So in other words, this Strategic Response Fund, formerly the Strategic Innovation Fund, includes these funds that really anchor the commitment not just of Stellantis, but of a number of automakers in Southern Ontario. The minister made her announcement at this committee that she would be initiating that process. We also had Lana Payne from Unifor here in strong support of what the government was doing in that time. And that had the result, I think, of increasing the pressure on the company. And we know that that process continues. So that's the work of this committee. But there are other committees that are involved in this work and that have doing work that is similar in theme or in spirit or in content to the motion that's before us. So I referred, Ms. O'Rourke referred earlier to the work of the Committee on International Trade. There's another committee, the OGO committee, on which I substituted last week, which actually heard from or attempted to hear from Stellantis in relation to the production of documents related to this, related to items that are very much conjured or referred to in this motion. There were some unfortunate technical difficulties, we gather. None of the committee members at OGO were very pleased with the with Stellantis when we learned that they were scheduled to make an appearance and did not. But I understand that that committee has now, that those issues have apparently been sorted out, and that committee will be hearing from Stellantis at a time in the not too distant future before the end of this fall sitting. So other committees are also involved in this work. Parliament has also been involved in this work in those places where it's, I think, most appropriate for Parliament to be engaged. So, for instance, there are we've done some research on how, you know, if this is an issue that requires a special session, a special parliamentary session or a special sitting to take the precedence over government business. Well, is this because we have not been attending to this in the House of Commons in Parliament? And this is just the House of Commons. We haven't done the research on the Senate. But we know that Parliament has been very engaged on this question of the unjustified American tariffs on the Canadian auto sector, and that indeed that the requests from the Conservative caucus, and I'll just quoting the motion, calling upon the government to live up to its promise made during the election to negotiate a win, have been discussed at great length over many months in Parliament. In fact, by our estimation, there have been 445 mentions of the automotive sector in some mention during debate since Parliament convened in late May. There have been 67 allusions or questions related to the auto sector in question period. I've answered some of those. In fact, I see my colleague, Ms. Akan. Ms. Akan put a question to me in my capacity as parliamentary secretary about in relation to Oakville. We've had 8 mentions in adjournment debates. We've had 1 statement by a member. I think I also believe Ms. Akan or Ms. O'Rourke, but I'm sure more statements are to come because this is such an important issue. And again, 67 mentions in question period with myself answering a number of those questions. So that's the parliamentary context of what's happening. I think it's probably important at this point, we've sort of looked at the present the last few weeks and months, but I think it's important to maybe take a more historical perspective on this question. And I'm fortunate to have in my riding one of Canada's premier auto sector historians, Dimitri Anastakis. He's written a number of books on the Canadian auto sector. He just won a Business Book of the Year award for his book on the Bricklin, which, although not subject to this motion, is a fascinating piece of Canadian history that I do recommend to folks because it's a story of, in part, a province going its own on industrial policy and unfortunately not succeeding. But Minister Anastakis' work, and he's an economic historian at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto, traces over a number of books the history of Canada's involvement in this sector and how deep and how long-lasting it runs and how integrated it is with government policymaking. And so this book, An Autonomous State, and I'll just quote from the book jacket here, is the first study covering the Canadian automobile industry since 1970 in any depth and it makes a major contribution to our understanding of Canadian automotive and industrial history. Thoroughly researched and well-written, it will appeal to readers interested in the Canadian automotive industry, Canadian industry more generally, and Canadian public policy. And that's the quote from Charles K. Hyde, Emeritus Professor of History at Wayne State University, which is, as people would probably be aware, in the Detroit area. And so, again, just an indication of the connectedness between the Detroit and Southern Ontario, Michigan and Southern Ontario, and our auto sectors. And this book, Autonomous State, is subtitled The Struggle for a Canadian Car Industry from OPEC to Free Trade. And again, I think is a strong indication of some of the themes in this motion. And I'm just going to quote from some of his material in the conclusion to this book, because I think it's very important to have this context as we consider this motion.
Mr. Bardizzi, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Colleagues, I can't help but get the sense that maybe some discussions would be useful amongst the parties to see if we can get somewhere. We're also approaching the hour. You'll be reminded that we do have extra resources today, which brings us to 2 o'clock. Typically at this point in a meeting, we would suspend briefly to allow people the ability to go to the washroom, check in with their staff, get a bite to eat. So I am going to exercise that thoughtfulness, I think, at this point, and I'm going to suspend. going to resume where we were. The floor belonged to Mr. Bardizzi. I do have to offer an apology to one of our colleagues here off the top. Mr. Guliamin has informed me that for the last 5 months I've been pronouncing his name incorrectly. So, Mr. Guliamin, thank you very much for the lesson in the pronunciation of your name and what turns out to be some shared Italian roots that our families have. So just before resuming debate here, I wanted to recognize that Guliamin would be the proper pronunciation, and you've brought it to my attention now, and I accept any future responsibility for getting it wrong. So thank you, sir. Mr. Bardizzi, the floor was yours.
Thank you, Chair. And before we broke, I was just sharing some of the information about this book that I'm going to share with the committee by Dimitri Anastakis, a constituent of mine, auto sector historian at the University of Toronto, and someone who I think if we had had the chance, if our study had gone more than special study had gone more than 3 sessions, I think we would have very much welcomed the opportunity to hear from because of his historical connection and knowledge on this file. And the history here is important because, I think sometimes, and even in Southern Ontario, where the footprint of the auto sector is so evident, if you're driving down the QEW towards Halton or driving east through Durham region on the 401, those plants are right there. And in some communities in Southern Ontario, the identity of those communities is very much tied to those plants, to these companies, including the parts manufacturers, including in Ms. O'Rourke's riding, Ms. Borelli's riding, Ms. Akan's riding, either with those manufacturers or major parts suppliers. But the footprint of the industry is in some ways hidden, and so if you go into more urban areas, if you go to other parts of Canada where you don't have the visible face of those plants right in front of you, you might not have as much appreciation for their economic impact and the export revenues, as well as the impact from the purchases that we make of those vehicles might not be as evident. And so I think each of us has probably heard in our communities before, well, why should we support the auto sector? And there's some questioning that sometimes happens, and I think it's the job of each one of us in this committee to push back a bit on that, but to bring the historical perspective. That this is something that's been happening in Canada for over 100 years. It's been an important part of the connectedness between Canada and the United States through thick and thin, that it's been part of the buildup of the capital accumulation in Southern Ontario in particular, to some extent Quebec. But we're also seeing actually the broadening of that capital accumulation as this sector diversifies, as the sector becomes more connected with information technology, in particular with electrification. We're seeing that this is a sector that is not just concentrated in Southern Ontario, but there's a footprint of this sector across Canada, and that it goes from, yes, the inputs and yes, the assembly work, but into things like software, into things like charging infrastructure, into things like materials, and of course the inputs of the materials themselves, which we have a comparative advantage with in many aspects of the supply chain. So we have this built-up capital endowment that we have, and one of the strong arguments for continued support is the built-up capital endowment combined with the expertise that we have amongst Canadian workers, both unionized and not in this sector, are real advantages that we have built up through billions of dollars of private and public investments, whole college programs, whole university programs, whole union locals that are dedicated to this work, and real pride of ownership. We heard Mr. Volpe in committee in his testimony talk about the Dodge Charger lineup that he buys from. Our first family car, my family was a 2000 Chevrolet Impala.
Mr. Falk, on a point of order.
I would. Mr. Bardizzi said that Mr. Volke spoke about the Dodge Charger line that he was buying, and it was actually the Dodge Challenger. And in particular, he bought the Demon 170.
always useful to have facts correctly presented at committee. And
to Mr. Volk, it'd be very important that he be properly represented.
fair enough, Mr. Falk, and your intervention provides a refreshing break from some of the testimony that we're receiving. So I certainly don't fault you for that, and I appreciate your intervention. Mr. Bardizzi, should you choose to correct the record or not is up to you.
Indeed, I will not only correct record, I will refer back to the Hansard, and I will I will confirm with Mr. Volpe, who I just saw this morning, which is why he was on my mind, because he's doing, I think, good hard work on behalf of his members in Ottawa, as well as with his membership. I will make sure that I am correct. I appreciate the correction, because I was so enamored. I was sharing the story of our Impala, our family Impala, which had the front bench that could seat 3, and it's a feature of a vehicle that's gone away now, but I know that is missed by my family, even though we're a family of 4. You always need that 6th middle bench seat in some fashion, and it's something that one of the little things we lament as this sector changes. But back to the history of this file, and I want to share a bit about the context of why this is so important. And I'm sharing this as I'm not going to make a specific editorial commentary on it just yet, but that is coming. And this is from Mr. Anastakis' book, Autonomous State. And why I think it helps us understand why we are so focused on this as a committee. And this is from the conclusion of his book. Half a century ago, a very simple idea about the Canadian auto sector started to take hold in the political and public imagination. The auto industry's importance to the Canadian economy and body politic could be summarized by a basic equation, an easy-to-remember ratio that varied only slightly in the decades to follow. Whether accurate or not, the notion that such a sprawling and complex industrial sector could be boiled down to a simple rubric made it very appealing. It gave politicians and policymakers a convenient rhetorical hammer by which to drive home the industry's importance and, perhaps more significant, justify their actions in the automotive field. It's not that the ratio wasn't true, because it essentially was. Then, as today, the production of automobiles remains without question the largest and most important economic sector in North America. Now, again, this book is a bit dated, but I think a lot of these facts continue to hold. This is from 2013. This book. The very simple idea that Mr. Anastakis is referring to, I'll continue quoting here. It began innocuously enough. In a 1960 CBC television report on the problems in the industry, journalist Norman DePoe claimed that 1 business in 7 in Canada was automotive or auto-related. A few years later, a young economics student at the University of Windsor ran an input-output analysis of employment in Ontario and came up with the startling result that 1 in 6 jobs in the province was connected in some way to the automotive sector. That student, Dennis Desrosiers, was hired by the provincial government as an auto analyst in the early 1970s, and his figure was used in a 1974 budget statement. I'll just close quotes here for a moment to say I think Mr. Desrosiers' advice is one that has been useful to many governments of many political stripes over the decades since. Back to Mr. Anastakis. By the mid-1970s, 1 in 6 had become a mantra repeated almost as often as fair share. Ontario Treasurer Darcy McHugh stated in the legislature in 1976 that the auto industry supported either directly or indirectly 1 in every 6 jobs in this province. In a 1976 Canadian Business article, journalist Mark Whitten wrote that the auto industry, quote, the auto industry is Ontario's largest employer. Directly or indirectly, it accounts for 1 out of 6 jobs in the province. In 1978, Ontario NDP leader Michael Cassidy also cited the figure, which had been prominently mentioned in the Ontario government report, Canada's Share of the North American Auto Industry in Ontario Perspective. Similarly, a 1979 Saturday Night article noted that the auto industry, quote, the auto industry is directly or indirectly responsible for 1 out of every 6 jobs in Ontario. It's the one indispensable industry. I'll just quote there and just, again, remark how central this sector has been historically, and how from the very beginning, or how very early on, and definitely in the reckoning of this book, which goes from the 1970s to the 2000s, how the job connectedness is key to this. Jobs that have been created over decades, and a supply chain, a set of professional and training capacities that have been built up over decades as a result. Back to Mr. Anastakis. By 1985, Ontario Premier David Peterson was telling reporters that, quote, 1 in 5 people in Ontario were in some way employed by the auto industry. During the 1987 Ontario provincial election and in the midst of the free trade debate, one of Peterson's Windsor candidates ran radio ads declaring that 1 in 6 jobs in Ontario depends on the auto industry. The figure has persisted even after decades of change. And I'll just stop there and skip ahead a little bit. The long-standing use of the 1 in 6 ratio is important because it reflects in a very representative way the central and underlying argument of this book. The sheer number of jobs and the relative importance of the auto industry within the Canadian economy became the driving paradigm that explains Canadian state action in the auto sector. More than any other, quote, fact, the level of automotive employment, itself a consequence of the level of production and investment in the Canadian sector, and the health of the trade balance in the auto pact, pushed politicians, policymakers, and workers to initiate and engage in a host of creative and aggressive policies and actions to ensure that Canada and its workers received what was seen as their fair share of the sector's bounty. 1 in 6 was and remains the corollary of the fair share mantra. And so again, I'll just close the quote there for just a moment and just try to shine a light on the spirit of this motion that is condemning the unjustified American tariffs on the Canadian auto sector and that of heavy vehicles with Monsieur Sainte-Marie's amended edition, is very much focused on real people, people who are earning livelihoods, people who could have a job that paid the bills, that took care of their families, and that was part of not only a local supply chain, but an international market, pride of manufacturing, pride of often ownership in those same vehicles. And that's I think the context that makes these unjustified American tariffs sting in the way they do, because it's in this context of an employment construct and a set of investments that go cross-border. I find it striking that Mr. Kingston, who was a witness here earlier, represents the CVMA, the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, which are American automakers. But such is the pride of ownership in these vehicles, such is the pride in manufacturing in these vehicles, such is the extent and the length of this footprint of these companies that they feel in a very real way to be Canadian. Back to Minister Anastakis. Canadians were not just looking for a fair share, they were looking for even more than that. By the 1980s, Canadian auto factories were producing nearly 2 million cars a year, while Canadians were buying only 3/4 that many. In other words, Canadians were enjoying a share of automotive production far greater than they, quote, deserved. More than anything else, this disproportionate production to sales ratio demonstrates the success of Canadian policymakers in pushing the fair share mantra to its limits, especially given that the Canadian market and industry was integrated into that of the world's largest market and largest car-producing nation, the United States. Indeed, the connectedness of the North American auto industry was both Canada's greatest strength and its most daunting threat in this period. Just close the quote there and show how history echoes in our present time. Clearly, our connectedness is both our greatest strength and our greatest threat in this particular moment. Back to Minister Anastakis. Integration allowed Canadians a certain leeway that was not possible in a solely national market. Whether through investment incentives, regulatory variations, or union breakups, integration provided Canadians with opportunities that would not normally have appeared within a normal national or non-continentalized industry. At the same time, what were initially threats that emerged because Canada's industry was continentally integrated, such as the Chrysler crisis or the issue of Japanese investment, became in time strengths. Again, the presence, the footprint of the sector that is so, I think, aptly captured in the initial parts of this motion around to negotiate a win to support the workers whose livelihoods depend on a good deal for Canada. That is the context of not only the footprint that we have had over decades, but the new footprint that we've been able to amass. And I think I'm perhaps, just drawing a perspective on Minister Anastakis' work here. Back to Mr. Anastakis. All of this hinged upon the integration introduced by the Auto Pact. The agreement legitimized Canadians' claims for a fair share of the industry and created opportunities for Canadian policymaking that were not present in other areas of trade or diplomacy. Achieving that fair share brought out ingenious and sometimes daring public policies and political maneuvers, such as the Ford incentive, Lumley's Yokohama squeeze, these are items that are referred to earlier in the book, or the duty remission orders. all of which were designed to accrue a greater share of the industry for Canadians. In the short term, these measures undoubtedly worked in bringing investment or production to the Canadian sector, and in the long term, they established Canada as a legitimate North American and global force in automotive production, though most of the policies themselves were ultimately dismantled. You know, we heard, let's close quote there for a moment, and again, I've referred to, and we've all referred to, the relative unanimity that we have perhaps on this committee, definitely across different governments of different stripes, around support for the sector. Support that was, I think, qualified for a moment in the immediate financial crisis when it sounded like the federal government of the day would not be as present for the sector as it was needed. But then I think saner heads prevailed, and there was a very artful federal, provincial, and U.S. federal tripartite engagement in saving many of the plants in Canada. And so Minister Anastakis kind of refers to that, and I'll quote again back from the book here. It helped, too, that Canadians could count on a close-knit bureaucracy in Ottawa, a willingness to cooperate with provinces in most instances, and a laser-like focus when it came to negotiating with other states, firms, associations, and especially the United States. Bargaining with a hegemon is a daunting task, yet Canadian politicians and policymakers were extremely capable in this regard. In numerous instances, from the Auto Pact to the stillborn efforts to prohibit incentives and the free trade negotiations, Canadian diplomats and civil servants exhibited preparedness, daring, and a willingness to stand dangerously close to the twitching and grunting elephant that was the United States. Close quote. Those are his words, not mine. Back to Mr. Anastakis. Canadians had to focus in a way that the United States did not, given how high the stakes were for the former. And in most instances, the Canadians proved effective negotiators. Different governmental structures also played a role in determining the outcomes of the auto trade, usually in Canada's favour. The parliamentary system, with its fused executive and legislative, the high level of cooperation between its core agencies, and the closeness between senior bureaucrats and elected officials made strategy development and tactical execution far less difficult than in Washington. In the American capital, the division of powers, jurisdictional competition, and the sprawling nature of the giant U.S. bureaucracy slowed American responses and it hindered aggressive bargaining. Moreover, Canada remained low on Washington's list of priorities, a position that undoubtedly helped Canadians at some point, though it hindered them at others. Just quote there, and again, share how important I think this historical element is to our current context, that we've had developed a capacity in government over years and decades of across different political parties of being able to really work to the maximum advantage of the Canadian sector. And even when there's good-natured debate, even if in those 445 interventions in the House are not always complementary to any one party, any one government, that we have broadly a policy alignment in this moment and in the decades past around the kinds of things that we need to do to support the sector. And that exists in the parliamentary circumstance, it exists between parliamentarians, it exists, you can even see it, I think, in the former government's Canada-US trade committee that was multi-partisan and had many ways of reaching out to the American administration of the day to ensure that Canadian best interests were met during the renegotiation of the NAFTA agreement at that time. This, I think, quote also shows what the benefits that we have from being perhaps not as much on the Americans' radar with respect to this specific sector as it is in Canada. And we know that we're now facing a bit of the consequences of the new administration's focus on this sector and some very specific statements that they've made. And indeed, Mr. Anastakis gets into that in his history as well, back to his book. But eventually, American policymakers saw the immense leeway Canadians exhibited in the auto trade, and particularly under the Auto Pact, as simply too much. The agreement itself had always been viewed as an intractable problem by elements of the U.S. government. And by the mid-1980s, its staunchest American defenders, the auto companies themselves, realized that Canadian auto policy efforts were in fact benefiting offshore producers to their detriment. When it became a subject for negotiation during the FTA, Free Trade Agreement talks, the Big Three saw no reason to further defend the auto agreement beyond maintaining it as a shadow of its former self. Indeed, the success of the Auto Pact for Canadians in part helps to explain its demise and the subsequent emergence of the Free Trade Agreement. By the time the idea of free trade was being negotiated, the industry was in its best shape. Most of the investment promises that the Canadian Big Three had made to Herb Gray, former Windsor MP and minister in the Trudeau government, in 1981 were being fulfilled. AMC had committed $8 million to convert its Brampton plant from Jeep production to cars, and eventually in 1984 it announced a new plant worth nearly $800 million in Brampton to build new cars. As promised, Ford's St. Thomas plant was converted at a cost of $73 million to produce EXP and LN7 front-wheel vehicles. Oakville had added a second shift to produce only cars, and the $40 million Essex aluminum plant had opened, not to mention the booming success of the Essex engine plant. GM Canada spent $3 billion to upgrade its facilities in Windsor, Oshawa, and St. Catharines. By mid-decade, the Japanese were coming on strong too, with Honda doubling its plant size, Toyota adding to its facility, and GM's Suzuki plant rounding out the foreign transplants operating in Canada to a tune of nearly $1 billion in new investments. And those investments, again, were in the dollars of the day, so those dollars are now increased in amount. And again, this paragraph is a very important reminder of how in change, how in conflict, how in tension, including with our chief trading partners, really good things can result. And so this paragraph, I think, very well encapsulates a new series of investments that happened in a moment of real challenge and change for Canada. There was, to some extent, some deindustrialization happening, as it was in many Western economies. And yet, look at all the investments that are being referred to in this paragraph. Many of the investments that were referred to in this paragraph are either still going strong or, in fact, the subject of this committee today. Continuing with Mr. Anastakis. The greatest fears of the Canadian industry that would be left behind as the Big Three retooled for the next generation of vehicles and that offshore producers would not establish plants in Canada had been avoided. The state had played an indispensable role in this achievement. In 1981, the chairman of the federal government's automotive task force, Campbell Stewart, triumphantly enumerated the different forms of, quote, government assistance to the automotive industry to his minister, Herb Gray. The long list included $200 million in loan guarantees for Chrysler, a $10 million grant from the Ontario government to Chrysler for an R&D center, the $68 million federal provincial grant for the federal Ford Essex engine plant, flexibility under the Auto Pact, and two duty to emissions programs, the General Order and the Expanded Order, that had provided a major incentive to foreign vehicle production to source parts in Canada, resulting in exports of over $88 million under these programs in 1980. By mid-decade, Canadian policymakers could add to this list voluntary export restraints, port slowdowns, and additional production based on duty or emission orders, all of which had helped convince the Japanese to come to Canada. It was an impressive record, and one that reflected an aggressive state interventionism, and a willingness to push the limits of public policy. In a 1984 speech, Bob White summed up perfectly Canadian state attitudes towards the industry. The importance of this industry, he told his union brothers, meant that we couldn't simply leave its survival to the dictates of the market. Really, really important quote here from Bob White, who, as this is not part of this history, but as we know, was instrumental in the creation of the CAW, which became one of the co-founding unions of Unifor. And it was a key auto negotiation in the 80s, which is actually the subject of a fascinating National Film Board documentary, Final Offer. I recommend it to all members here who want to get a further deepening of their knowledge of the auto sector. Bob White led the exit of Canadian auto workers from the UAW to the CAW. But this quote is a really important quote. The importance of this industry means that we couldn't simply leave its survival to the dictates of the market. And so I think in this part of the history, we're seeing the results of policymaking and moves made by governments of different political stripes that I think really highlight the importance, as the motion refers to, of the workers whose livelihoods depend on a good deal for Canada. And it really highlights how these tariffs are indeed unjustified. Continuing with Mr. Anastakis, and I think all of us, a number of us would experience this in our own work in our ridings, those drives down the 401, the 403, the QEW, as I mentioned. And here's back to Mr. Anastakis on that sense of connectedness. On looking closely at a political map of North America, one is struck by just how prominently southern Ontario juts into the Midwestern U.S. automotive heartland on one side and into one of its greatest regional markets, the Northeast, on the other. It is important to note that southern Ontario became Canada's automotive heartland through its good fortune to be located near the burgeoning Midwestern carriage trade, with its southern Ontario counterpart just across the river in Detroit. Risk, as exhibited by earlier entrepreneurs such as Ford Canada's Gordon M. McGregor, played a role, as did, of course, the protectionist policies of John A. Macdonald, which created Canada's original branch plant industry. He goes on to write, first, the success of the industry and the ability of Canadian policymakers to utilize the wide range of approaches they did was in part a consequence of the concentration of the sector and the great automotive producing cluster that stretched northeastward from Windsor. Cluster theory has played a prominent role in explaining the success of some regional industries in Canada and beyond, and the Canadian automotive sector has been the focus of a number of these assessments. And I'll just pause here and note that there's an important crosswalk with our productivity study, which is about where concentrations of industries can exist and where further investment then follows and where workers can be developed. We heard a bit of that with Mr. Meyer earlier today. Back to Mr. Anastakis. The concentration of automotive assembly and parts production in southwestern Ontario focused policymakers, both at Ottawa and at Queen's Park, in terms of creating a coherent industrial policy for the region, and certainly keeping elected officials attuned to the political power that this populous region represented. Yet the influence of the Ontario cluster did not mean that other regions were abandoned when it came to support for automotive industrial development. Federal efforts to stretch the auto sector outward from Ontario, often in the name of regional development, proliferated in the 1970s and 1980s. When Honda announced in 1985 that its Canadian plant would be located in southern Ontario, British Columbia NDP MP Ian Waddell complained that, quote, while we welcome the Honda plant for Ontario workers, the minister must appreciate that Western Canadians would like some of that too. Waddell's argument was partially inspired by the logic that Toyota already had a wheel plant in British Columbia. Moreover, British Columbia was not far from California, the world's largest car market, where the GM-Toyota joint venture NUMMI, NUMMI, had recently been announced. In response to these demands, IT&C Minister Ed Lumley replied that the nature of the industry, focused as it was on a just-in-time model, called for, quote, suppliers to be within a 75-mile radius of an assembly facility. In any event, Lumley argued, the federal government had provided, quote, almost one half of the financial assistance to get that Toyota plant to locate in British Columbia, while it had given no direct cash for Honda's Ontario facility. And I just want to, I'll close the quote there and just remind us that the effects and benefits of this sector, yes, it's for the workers, yes, it's for the supply chain, but there are also other downstream investments and benefits I think are kind of alluded to in this paragraph. Most notably, you know, the opening of trade routes more generally to through the Detroit-Windsor crossing, the Buffalo, and multiple crossings in the Southwest, multiple crossings in the Niagara region, are very important endowments that we have because we have such an important trade in a key commodity in a key sector. That trade in that key sector and those trucks that go down, again, the 401, the 403, the QEW, the 420, and other major highways, create the demand for the kind of transportation infrastructure, the kind of connectivity infrastructure that benefits not only the auto sector, but a variety of other sectors, a variety of goods-producing sectors. And so when we think about the geographic concentration of this sector in southern Ontario, one that, to the commendation of, I think all members of this committee, we are focused on its impact in southern Ontario, and we are appreciating that even though it might not benefit our specific ridings as much as other ridings, it has these downstream effects that reach beyond those agglomeration economies, that 75-mile radius. So that's a bit of the background from Minister Anastakis around the concentration here. Elsewhere in his book, I think he positions the overall thesis as follows, and I'll again quote from Mr. Anastakis. The auto industry, the largest, most complex, most competitive, and most challenging industrial sector in North America. There is an immense amount of information on the automobile and its industry, and the flow is unstoppable. A century of dailies, weeklies, magazines, and reams of raw data from governments and consumer groups, not to mention auto enthusiasts amateur historians, and professional firms whose raison d'etre are to analyze the industry. There are whole government departments working on the auto sector. And the size and scope of the companies involved add a dimension that is not found in most industries. There is also the fact that, although the auto industry is a topic of historical interest, its key entities, the auto and parts-making firms, are ongoing business concerns, some more than a century old, that are not keen to share their corporate knowledge. Nor sometimes are governments, given the political and economic sensitivity of the automotive sector. In short, there is an automotive data fog, one complicated by inaccessibility to some of its most important sources of information. In his book, he says, it is quite impossible to examine every issue, even within the focused period and themes I have chosen. By necessity, I've left out a number of issues, elements, and actors out of this book. There is, for instance, little discussion of the retail side of the industry, or the aftermarket, not to mention design, financing, advertising, and marketing. Nor does the book dwell on automobiles themselves or deal in any way with specialty manufacturers of heavy trucks, city buses, motorhomes, or motorcycles. Snowmobiles, which became very popular and an issue in Canada-US trade in the late 1960s and early 1970s, also do not receive attention. And I just want to pick out each of those sectors in turn and describe how each of them has a real important impact on this debate. So, for instance, the design, financing, and advertising and marketing side. Well, we know that this sector has creates a number of jobs and has a number of pieces of connectivity to it. Yes, there is maybe the image that we have in our mind, and again, I commend watching the Final Offer movie to see how manufacturing what it looked like in the GM plant in Oshawa in the 1980s. It looks, I gather, quite different now, and you have people using machine tools, mostly men in those factories at the time, doing the assembly work, doing the upholstery work, a variety of pieces of work. But this sector is one of the biggest spenders historically of advertising dollars in Canada. In fact, one of the key parts of this sector is that it has helped sustain the newspaper industry historically in the 70s, 80s, and 90s with the large commercial advertising, whole sections dedicated to automobiles. The Toronto Star had its own auto insurance columnist who was so dedicated, because there's all kinds of spillovers in the sector. And don't need to remind members of this committee that auto insurance is a mandatory product for purchase in Ontario, and I think in all provinces. And so if you have an auto sector, it means you have an auto retail sector, which means you have auto users, which means you have the downstream effect of auto insurance purchasing, of detailing, of obviously mechanics and shops of a variety of kinds. I'll do a quick side comment to remind all members of the committee to get their winter tires ready because these are necessary, and it's, I think, a sign of the ongoing demand of the sector that we can have a strong future of all of these different sectors, even if the particulars change. Mr. Anastakis also refers to the retail side, and we heard earlier from the global automakers of Canada who are somewhat represented in manufacturing, and definitely the very large footprint of Toyota and Honda in Southern Ontario is a very important part of that. But global automakers of Canada have a number of members who are not who are not manufacturing currently in Canada, but are doing retailing. And we know that Canadian appetite for vehicles is broad and includes European vehicles, Asian vehicles, a variety of kinds. We also know that, again, thanks to some of those investments that have been referred to and that history, that we are now starting to attract our first European automakers to Canada with the plant in St. Thomas and the associated activities there. Referred to the design, financing, advertising, and marketing, and so those are what might be typically considered white-collar jobs, jobs with a proud history here, and there are marketing firms, there are all kinds of communications outfits, there are all kinds of creative professionals who work in the sector who are involved in some of this work. Mr. Anastakis also says, nor does the book dwell on automobiles themselves. And we know that automobile culture in Canada is very strong. You know, Mr. Volpe referred to the vehicle he drives with a certain degree of pride. For me, it's the family vehicle, the Impala with the front bench. Others will have other vehicles that they have a real fondness towards. And there's also a great automotive history where we have collectors in Ontario and across Canada who take pride of ownership in their work, take pride in ownership in the history of their vehicles. It also extends, I think, into other related sectors. So the automobile racing sector, for instance, is one that I think has an unusually large footprint in Canada compared to other places. I've been with my family regularly to the Merrittville Raceway and seen the different ways that people soup up their vehicles. Haven't yet been for the school bus race, but that is something that is available. And we know that school bus manufacturing has its own unique history in Canada, which again is referred to in this quote around the specialty manufacturers of heavy trucks, city buses, motorhomes, or motorcycles and snowmobiles. Snowmobile manufacturing is very important to the culture of this country. One of the founding stories of one of our major companies, Bombardier. And as we've seen specialty manufacturing come and go, we've experienced the stress of this. We know that the motion, including the amendment by Monsieur Sainte-Marie, I think is in the spirit of heavy vehicles and particularly what's happening to PACCAR. And so we know that that is something that is very, these different elements of the sector are really important. And so in the spirit of this motion, calling up the government to live up to its promise made during the election and condemning the unjustified American tariffs on the sector, it's in the spirit where the automobile has a real sense of connection to the real lived experience of Canadians every day. Mr. Anastakis goes on to say, some actors are dealt with only from particular angles. For instance, consumers' views are taken into account when these have an impact on the politics, policy, and profitability of the sector. I'll just close the quote there. And we've had a robust debate already in this committee about the attractiveness, the desire for Canadians desire lower emitting vehicles, to purchase lower emitting vehicles, that there seems to be a global market trends in the direction of more electrification, that there are maybe global market trends despite Mr. Volpe's choices that might be going slightly against the direction of some of the muscle car trends. We know that in turn consumer views are the result of policy as referred to in this quote, not only in Canada but in the United States. And so we know that the California vehicle emission standards are a real influence on how capital is deployed in Canada, and the unhooking or the apparent unhooking that seems to be coming from California emission standards from the rest of the United States and therefore into Canada is something that's going to affect consumer preferences. Mr. Anastakis goes on to say, the auto workers' union is covered extensively, but less so are the workers themselves. Time and space make this unavoidable. And I think, all of us in this committee and in the House of Commons, the 445 interventions I referred to, I think we probably approach those fundamentally on behalf, first and foremost, of the workers. I had the pleasure of meeting I have pleasure of meeting workers in my riding, as I think we all of us do. I just had the pleasure a couple of weeks ago of meeting MyTax, which is an important connector between companies and academic research, and learning that one of the MyTax award winners was in fact someone who is doing work on automotive sector enhancements, innovations, something that benefited companies in Southern Ontario. So that was someone, he wouldn't have necessarily seen himself as an auto sector worker, and yet he came out of research and is doing an innovation that is now benefiting the sector. Auto Workers Union, and I just want to double down on how important the auto sector union, the exit of the Canadian auto sector workers from the UAW in the 80s was in really driving confidence and inspiration towards an entire union movement in Canada. One that said that Canadian union workers could stand proudly themselves. They could form their own union. Of course, there's no comment or disrespect on the many Canadian union members who are part of larger internationals, and we have a number of those, including some involved in the sector. But that we were able to have the benefit of what is now Unifor coming out of a pretty important Canadian-led negotiation with U.S. auto sector workers, I think is another part of our story of sovereignty. Mr. Anastakis goes on, even a few significant manufacturers only play a minor role in the book. As the focus is on the big three, those who controlled over 90% of the industry until the 1980s, companies like the American Motors Corporation and the International Harvester, though bona fide manufacturers under the Auto Pact, are not examined in detail. As we know, AMC then became part of the big three, retaining their brand Jeep. Nor is Hyundai, which was very successful as an importer into Canada in the 1980s and subsequently opened a manufacturing facility in Quebec in 1989. We know that Hyundai is an object of interest. It's a growing company for lots of different jurisdictions interested in attracting Hyundai investment. We know that Minister Joly was there recently. We know that they're a very innovative automaker that I think has a lot of potential and obviously selling lots of vehicles here in Canada at the moment. And again, to the theme of electrification, I believe the Kona is a Hyundai vehicle, and they have a very successful, popular plug-in hybrid model. I'll return to Mr. Anastakis. Ultimately, this book does not describe some sort of golden age of statism or interventionist utopia, but it does illuminate a period of active and creative policymaking in a highly competitive continental and global economic sector. Indeed, it is undoubtedly true that the Canadian state played a central and positive role in creating and sustaining industrial policies in the auto sector that lasted for 2 decades, policies that brought great prosperity to Canada and especially to Ontario. And although the auto industry was centred in Ontario, the sector's success emanated outwards, and this prosperity was shared by all Canadians through tax revenues, equalization, and employment opportunities. These industrial policies also helped to maintain a cluster of innovation that provided further opportunity in the form of the emerging Canadian-owned parts industry, which generated its own entrepreneurial research and development and spin-off opportunities. By the early 2000s, Ontario produced more vehicles than any other jurisdiction in North America, including Michigan. And the auto industry today remains its single most important economic driver and the largest value-added Canadian export sector. Again, from Mr. Anastakis' words from 2013. And I think it's important to underline that broad shared prosperity that comes from the sector. And one I think we're seeing echoes of with the move towards electrification. I know the electrification is a concern of some members of this committee, and we've had motions and we've had statements in the House and in this committee saying that, seeming to imply at least to members on this side, that electrification is not something to be desired, or that we should just leave it entirely to others, without, I think, a recognition of the real benefits that electrification can bring to helping to meet our climate objectives, but also, I think, to appealing to the tastes of consumers by appealing to the abilities and built-up infrastructure that we are now doing in this next generation of auto investments, and therefore really being that next export sector that has so much potential. And I think, if anything, these comments from Mr. Anastakis that I've read into the record show that nimble and inventive and aggressive policymaking is something that's always been a feature of the Canadian auto sector, and something that has had quite a bit of bipartisan or federal-provincial cooperation, something that we wish we could have. I think all members in this House wish we could see more of that on other policy areas where there may be greater differences. And so the move towards electrification, which I think my colleague Ms. O'Rourke has shared in past meetings, we know is more distributed. It results in more of that shared prosperity because the supply chain, because of the benefits that come from this work, just stretch out more broadly. We can have electrification including electric subsidiaries provided by major oil and gas related companies like Parkland. Parkland has an electrification subsidiary, which we understand employs about 250 people and is bringing electric vehicle infrastructure to different parts of Canada. Electrification obviously also involves a broader set of inputs. with the battery components, with the critical minerals, something that I think our government has been very focused on with a critical minerals strategy, and with, again, a real focus on the sovereignty around those critical minerals, making sure that we are doing deals with other countries, and through initiatives like our Major Projects Office, ensuring that critical minerals can indeed be brought out and brought into the manufacturing supply chain for auto, so that, as the motion says, we can live up to our promise made during the election to honor the workers whose livelihoods depend on a good deal for Canada, and so that we can condemn the unjustified American tariffs on the auto sector. Those are just a couple of the benefits of electrification. I think the broader shared prosperity that comes from this policy move, which I think in Mr. Anastakis's context and the history that he's provided, really helps us see how we have to be constantly innovating on policy to ensure we continue to get the benefits of this fast-moving sector, but one with substantial capital buildup. Mr. Anastakis, though, isn't just a historian. He's been writing more recently as well. And so I want to quote from a Globe and Mail op-ed that he wrote before the election, actually, but after the U.S. Announcements on tariffs in March and April. And he writes, "It's often said that this or that particular moment represents a paradigm shift in history. In the 1910s, Henry Ford ushered in the second industrial revolution of mass production and consumption with his use of the moving assembly line, new production techniques, vertical and horizontal integration, and economies of scale. The result was, quote, Fordism and all of its immense consequences. As Ford arrogantly put it, I invented the modern age. From the 1960s to the 1980s, IG Toyota's Toyota Production System, or TPS, improved upon Fordism by utilizing just-in-time, continuous self-improvement, and lean production techniques. Combined with new labor approaches and advancing computerization, the auto industry and much of society was reshaped once again. Since the 2000s, we are in the midst of another pivotal shift. Industry 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution, is the embrace of robotics and advanced production processes, digitization, computerization, AI, new materials, and propulsion systems. But the electric vehicle revolution is not just a technological leap forward that represents the future of the auto sector and mobility. It is a strategic imperative in the competition with China, and an essential part of the response to the challenge of climate change. I think I really appreciate these comments from Mr. Anastakis in this op-ed, because it again contextualizes, I think, some of the things the government is doing. It shows how important it is to, as we agree in the motion, to condemn the unjustified American tariffs on the sector, to support the workers whose livelihoods depend on a good deal for Canada. But it really goes to show what that broader shared prosperity can look like. And in fact, it's something that this committee will be looking at in its forthcoming study on artificial intelligence. And I would commend to this committee that, in the spirit of this motion, it would be very valuable to have some specific witnesses who can speak to the role of AI and computerization in the auto sector. We've heard, you occasionally hear some concerning things that are happening in the in-vehicle experience with AI chatbots, but we know that the broader role of AI and computerization, digitization, which is already here, is something that is going to be a potential benefit to Canada. Again, contextualizing those auto sector workers beyond just beyond the people who are on the factory floor, who are very important, and again, who do anchor this work. So reaching beyond them towards the innovators who are creating new companies, new technologies, the people in the mines and the mining companies that are extracting the critical minerals that we need for this sector. The builders who are building construction, who are building the plants for these new plants that we're seeing built, one already in Windsor built, two being built in and around St. Thomas. So this broader context of investments that we see in the sector, I think, with government policymakers at the fore in a way that is fairly, with some fair degree of agreement across partisan lines, very strong alignment between levels of government, and these different technologies, I think, are very important features of the Canadian auto sector that are being referred to in this motion. And I think, it's really important that the electrification movement that we're moving towards, in which, all of the world is going to, the question is at what pace and with what policy support. we have a strong view that the policy supports that we have put in place to support, in particular, some of the manufacturing, the critical mineral strategy, will have a much broader impact and benefit to constituents of ours in, I think, every part of Canada. And to really see that connectivity as being important, I think, would also be in the spirit of the motion. I know that the amendment, I know that this motion does not refer to electrification, but it is a key fact that electrification is a key feature of our automotive present and future, whether it's consumer trends, whether it's the plants that are currently operating in Windsor and soon to operate in St. Thomas, whether it's some of the lines that we are trying to attract elsewhere. And I think, really lifting that up and celebrating it is an important part of this. And Mr. Anastakis' history, I think, shares very compellingly how it's been the continual evolution of policymaking in response to new threats, whether it's new trade threats, new technological threats, new threats of investment being withdrawn or not withdrawn, that are really key to having a vibrant sector. And so, yes, we can and we should condemn the unjustified American tariffs on the Canadian auto sector, but we should also do the very important work in Parliament to pass the budget, do the very important work in Parliament to have the debate on these issues, as I've referred to with those 445 interventions.
Mr. Bardisi, I would hate to interrupt you, but I'm going to do that. Colleagues, we've exhausted our resources for today's meeting. Very much appreciate the conversation. I'm going to move to adjourn. We'll talk again. Thank you, colleagues.